King Solomon is getting old. Not too old, but he's getting up there in age. Are there important lessons that I want to share with you guys that I know many people wouldn't have caught on to? I tend to be a bit more prudent in my studies. I tend to catch things that I don't see others talking about. So I initially I was just going to talk about Josiah and the important lesson about the end of his life that God is teaching all of us through it. The important lesson about not interfering in God's plans and the detrimental effects it will have on you. But to get to that point, I realized I got to start from Solomon. So towards the end of Solomon's life, not towards the end, what am I saying? Like towards, as he's getting older in age and he's becoming less patient with his wives, he starts to give in to the urges of his wives. He has many foreign wives. And he starts building altars to their gods. And obviously, God becomes incensed at him and sends a prophet to tell him that he's going to strip away the kingdom from him, but not in his lifetime, in the lifetime of his son Rehoboam. But for the sake of his servant David, he would not strip away all the tribes. He would strip away all but one, Judah, because God loves Jerusalem and he wants his servant David to have a lamp before him always. Now that lamp, remember, the lamp, this is just me going off the top of my head. It's like Solomon carries the DNA, the genetic makeup of his father, David. All the kings of Judah carry the DNA of David, their forefather. So God, being omniscient and as he is, he sees the genetic makeup of all the descendants of David. So all of them who are ruling, even though it's not David himself, God still sees David in his descendants. So like God told Solomon, for the sake of my servant David, your father, so that he would have a lamp before me always. So present tense, even when David is dead, even when Solomon is dead, David is still present before God. Not only because God is the God of the living and not of the dead. So David is still alive in the eyes of God. We know that, right? We know where that reference comes from. But also because the DNA and the genetic marker or makeup of David is in his genealogy. So David is still literally before God always. Okay, that's just off the top of my head, but so God keeps Judah as the inheritance of David. When the prophet tells Solomon this, obviously Solomon gets upset. But there was a man that was working under Solomon because Solomon was very strict with the Israelites. All the wealth that Solomon acquired, it was because of the wisdom that God gave him. But understand that wisdom that God gave him required the Israelites to serve Solomon, but it wasn't easy peasy for the Israelites. The Israelites were under heavy burdens under Solomon. So much so that when Solomon's son Rehoboam gained power, now I'm gonna mention Jeroboam. Okay, let me mention Jeroboam first. Jeroboam was a hard worker under Solomon, and he was a valiant warrior. Solomon, I don't know how the phone fell. I don't know if I'm talking too loud or what. Solomon had people under his service. One of the hardest working men of under his service was a man by the name of Jeroboam. Now, Solomon noticed Jeroboam's hard work, and he made him a high official, right? He made him oversee other people, other workers. So Jeroboam was special. He was already in a high position and was known by the Israelites. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go along the story. Now, this is all going to lead to Josiah, and the important lesson about Josiah's death from God. Not that God was trying to teach us a lesson because of it. It's just because what God did, because that happened, that teaches us a lesson. So it's good to keep it in mind, and I want to share that with you guys. So Jeroboam, right, under Solomon. Now, Solomon put heavy burdens on the Israelites. They were working really, really hard, okay, for Solomon, and Solomon enjoyed his wealth. Now, the Israelites were living at a time of wealth. It was a time of peace. There was no war because of the blessing of God upon the Israelites. But the Israelites were under heavy burdens, not harsh slavery, but they were working. Okay, they were working. They were building for Solomon, building here and there, lots of building projects. You know what I'm saying? Like the timbers and the wood, people who had to, masonry, and they have to carpenters craft out things, build things. Okay, so the people are working hard for Solomon. Even though it's a time of prosperity, they're still working hard. Now, you would say, why would God bless Solomon and let the Israelites work so hard? Well, if we rewind the tape and go back to the time of Samuel, Samuel was like, he was a prophet, but he was also a judge, right? Because after the judges, after Samson and Jephtah and Ehud, after the judges died off, Samuel came after Jephtah. Jephthah's daughter is like, kind of like believe that Jephthah's daughter, who had to vow to keep her virginity because of Jephthah's vow to God to win the battle, it's like assumed that Jephthah's daughter helped raise Samuel to be, in the temple. So at that time period, Jephthah's daughter, Samuel, he's a kid. Now Samuel grows up and he becomes like a judge, but he's also a prophet. So you have these two. During this time, God is the king of Israel. But the Israelites wanted a king for themselves because Samuel's two sons who were to succeed him, they were not too good. I believe their names were Joel and Abijah. They were not too good. So the people were saying, well, when you're dead, who's going to oversee us? Your two sons are not like you. So the people said, we want a king like the nations around us. Now, Samuel didn't like that, but God told Samuel to listen to them because he told Samuel to listen to them. So God raised up Saul to be their king. But Samuel told the people by the word of God that the king that you guys want, you're going to know the difference between serving God as your king and serving a person as your king, a human as your king. You're going to have to give him your daughters. You're going to have to give him certain portions of your goods so that he'll be rich. He's going to place burdens upon you. And this is going to be your punishment because you chose to want a human king instead of God as your king. Okay. And then God says, so that you will know the difference between serving me as your king and serving a human as your king. So fast forward to Solomon. The people are under heavy burdens again under Solomon's rule as part of the punishment because they abandoned God as their ruler and wanted man to be their ruler, like the nations around them, right? Okay. So now Jeroboam, he's known by the people because Solomon raises him up because Solomon sees that Jeroboam is a hard worker. But when the prophet comes to tell Solomon that God is going to rip the kingdoms away from you, as time goes on, Solomon in all his wisdom realizes that Jeroboam is a person whom God is going to give the kingdoms to at the time when his son Rehoboam begins to reign. So now the Bible doesn't say that, but we do know that Jeroboam fled Israel because of Solomon. So obviously that means that Solomon came to figure out in his wisdom that, you are going to be the one that God is going to give you the kingdoms. Yeah, I don't like you. You're going to take away the kingdoms from my son Rehoboam. I don't like you. So Jeroboam flees and he runs and he seeks refuge under Egypt. I forget the king's name. But he goes to Egypt. Pharaoh, Egypt. So when Solomon dies, word reaches Egypt that Solomon is dead. Because remember, Solomon had a marriage alliance with a daughter of Egypt. So they're close, close. They're interconnected. So Jeroboam finds out that Solomon is dead. He comes back to Israel. Now, the people come to Rehoboam and they tell Rehoboam, listen, your father placed heavy burdens on us. We're hoping that you're not going to be the same as your father. So please go easy on us. You know what I mean? So, but remember, God's intention and what God wants to do is split up the kingdoms. So Rehoboam seeks counsel from the older men, and the older men tell Rehoboam, listen, you should listen to the people. Don't be tough. Otherwise, you will lose the support of the people. But Rehoboam, Solomon's son, doesn't listen to them. He goes and he seeks counsel from the younger men, his contemporaries, people who he grew up with, and they tell him, no. Don't go easy on the people. Tell them that if my father was tough on you, I'm going to be even tougher on you, to the point where what my father did would be known as easy stuff, right? So he says, my pinky would be as big as my father's thigh. That's he was going to put. So when the people heard that, they were like, okay, yeah, we're done with you. We have no share in David. So you rule over yourself. You're not going to rule over us. But this was so that God will split the kingdom, right? As a matter of fact, when the kingdoms was split up and God gave the other tribes to Jeroboam, and Rehoboam only had Judah and Benjamin, I believe, Rehoboam wanted to fight against the other tribes, the other 10 tribes, against Jeroboam. But a prophet came and told the Israelites that no, do not fight amongst yourselves, because these turn of events came about because of me, because of God Almighty. So do not fight amongst yourselves. So the people listened and they didn't fight, right? So now Jeroboam is king, but the people are still going to Jerusalem to worship Jehovah. Jeroboam doesn't like that, because in his mind, he's like, if the people keep going back to Jerusalem where Rehoboam is king, maybe they will turn their hearts back to Rehoboam and Rehoboam will have the whole kingdom. So he's like, no. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up, so he set up an altar, a pagan altar, right? A golden calf, one in Bethel and one in Dan. And the people got so involved in this pagan worship that they went to the one that was as far as Dan. It was even further away. They didn't even go to the one in Bethel, which was closer. They went to the one in Dan, which was further away. That's how bad it became. Now, this is where you can arguably say that false worship began in Israel because of Jeroboam, whom God installed as king. Now, before God installed Jeroboam as king, he sent a prophet to him and told him, I believe the prophet's name was Ahijah, not sure, don't quote me on that. But he sent a prophet to him and told him, this is the reason why I'm taking the kingdom away from Solomon, because of false worship, idol worship. You would think that Jeroboam, that would stick in his head, because here it is, he's a nobody and God is going to make him king over 10 tribes. And the reason is because Solomon was engaged in false worship, idolatry, paganism. But no, because of his lack of trust in God, in thinking that maybe the people will go back to Rehoboam when God said that, no, I'm going to give you the kingdoms, you should trust in God. No, he got scared that the people will turn back to Rehoboam. So he made 2 golden calves. Right? Now, I say arguably, you can say that that's when false worship began. But I say that because you can argue that it began with Solomon, because Solomon was the one who was building pagan altars for his wives, and he had 1,000 wives. I mean, well, he had 700 wives, 300 concubines. Or was it 300 concubines? I mean, 300 wives, 700 concubines. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But it was 7 and 3 of the other. But he had 1,000 women. And a lot of them were pagans. So he's making altars. So you can arguably say that that's when false worship began. But after Solomon, Rehoboam, you had some faithful kings in Judah. But most of the kings in Israel were just pagans, if not all, if I'm not mistaken. So you can arguably say that it began with Solomon or Jeroboam, whichever one. And ever since Jeroboam's time, that was when God began to plan to like punish the Israelites, obviously. So there was something else I wanted to mention, but it's so many pieces I forgot. Maybe I'll remember. If not, I'll put it in the comment section, in the description, the video below, when I watch this video back. Okay, so now Jeroboam is king. Rehoboam is king of the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Jeroboam is king of the 10 tribes. So now Jeroboam, he's so into this paganism that he basically puts anyone as a priest who wants to be a priest for these pagan idols, right? So God sends a prophet to come and tell Jeroboam about his grave sin, and thereby a specific altar, right? Now, when the man of the true God, the prophet, comes to Jeroboam and tells him his punishment, Jeroboam stretches out his hand against the prophet, and God strikes the Jeroboam's arm, and it becomes stiff, right? He can't. It becomes dry, like a bony, right? He can't bring it back to himself. So the Jeroboam begs the man of the true God to soften God's face so that God would heal him. So the man of the true God prayed on behalf of the king, and God restored him. So the man of the true God softened God's face, right? Okay. But the prophecy from the man of the true God was that there will be a king that will be born who will offer up the priests who sacrifice on those altars. He will offer up their bones. He will basically kill them and crush them, right? And he would sacrifice the priests who are offering sacrifices on this pagan idol. Josiah, when he's born, he will kill those priests, those pagan priests, and crush their bones and sacrifice them upon that altar, right? And the sign would be that the altar will break in half. So now we have the story about Josiah. He's prophesied to be born. So he's a very important figure. And yet God still lets something happen to him because of a certain reason, which is what this whole video is about. So keep Josiah's birth in the future in mind, right? Now, before that, there's another important lesson before we get to this important lesson about Josiah. The man, the prophet, who God sent to tell Jeroboam about his punishment and the bad deeds that he's done, God told that prophet that when he goes to see Jeroboam, that he should not eat or drink anything in that land. And he should not go back the way in which he came in, right? That was what God told him, right? Okay. So when the man of the true God finishes his assignment, he goes a different route from which he came in, because that's what God told him. Do not go back from where you came, go a different route, right? So he's going a different route. And as he's going a different route, another man of the true God comes and tells him, hey, come and eat with me, right? And drink with me. And the prophet tells him, oh no, I can't do that, because Jehovah has told me not to eat or drink in this place. But the other prophet tells him, now this prophet, he's an older prophet, like probably his duty is finished, but I don't remember if his duty is finished, if he's still a prophet, but he was a prophet for sure, right? And the prophet tells him, oh no, you can eat and drink in this land, because God has told me that you can. Because I too am a prophet of the Most High God. You could come and eat in this land. So the man of the true God, whom God told him not to eat and drink in that land, listens to the other man of the true God, who claims that God has told him that, okay. So they go and they eat. And as they're eating, Jehovah speaks through the older prophet and tells the prophet whom God told him not to eat, he tells him that he would not be buried next to his ancestors, right? And that basically he's gonna die in that land. And so when the man finishes eating, he leaves and he gets on his donkey. And as he's going, God appoints a lion to kill him. Now, when the lion kills him, the lion doesn't eat up his body. The lion is just sitting there next to the donkey, next to the dead man's body. And then word goes out in the city that the prophet is dead. And so the old prophet, he hears about it and he says, oh, that's the prophet who God told not to eat in this land, but he still did. So he went and he went and picked up the guy and gave him a burial, but obviously not in the burial of his ancestors. Like God said, he would not be buried in the land of his ancestors, together with his ancestors. Before I continue with that story, here's one of the lessons. One, because there's no indication in the record that God punished the older prophet for telling the newer prophet that he should eat and drink in the land when God told him not to, because the written record does not say that the older prophet was punished, right? But God actually spoke through him. It means that maybe God did speak to the older prophet and was testing the newer prophet. Maybe the newer prophet had in his heart a wanting to eat and drink and was looking for any excuse to oh, okay, well, God told you, okay, well, then fine. God told you I can eat? You sure you too are a prophet? Oh, okay, fine. Right? So a test. But now, with wicked things, God does not test us, nor can he himself be tried. So now this isn't a wicked thing, right? So with wicked things, God does not test us, nor can we be tried. He does not put us through more than we can bear. So we could say that it was a test, but so that I'm free from guilt, let me not say that. But the lesson is, even if an angel or a prophet tells you something contrary to what the word of God has already told you, do not listen to the newer prophet if it contradicts what God has already told you. So now for Islam, even if Islam is from God, even if it's not, because it rejects the sacrifice of our Lord, Yahushua. So obviously it's not. But I'm saying, even if it were to have come from God, we can't listen to that message because because it contradicts the first message. You understand? So that's a lesson that I wanted to give in that one. So just keep that in mind. Okay. The other lesson is that when the older prophet came and took the newer prophet's dead body, he told his sons that he wants to be buried next to this older prophet, right? Now, why would he want to be buried together with him? Well, is it because if you're closer together when you're dead, in the afterlife, you're going to be together? No. Because in the resurrection, where your bones are, that's where you'll be resurrected. That's why the patriarchs were buried together. That's why Jacob told his children that, because remember, Jacob died in the land of Goshen in Egypt, a good part of Egypt. So his bones are there when he died. He told his sons that when God fulfills his promise and takes them out of Egypt and brings them to the promised land, that they should take his bones from there and bring it to the promised land, Canaan, where Jacob was prior to the famine in Joseph's time, when Joseph was definitely Peninnah. So because where you're buried, that's where you'll be resurrected. What's the whole point of, if I have my wife and I'm in the land of Israel and I'm an Israelite and I die without having children, that my brother would marry my wife and have children for me so that I would have a plot of land in the land of Canaan? What's the point of that law? My brother sleeping with my wife. What's the point of that law if I'm not going to be resurrected to the land of Canaan in the resurrection to enjoy that plot of land, but I'm going to be resurrected to heaven? That tells you that no, you're going to be resurrected to earth. That's a different video, which I've made videos on. That's also another point. So now, after 26 minutes of speaking, let's get to Josiah. Okay. I'm going to make this a part 2. Before I forget, God tests us, but he does not tempt us. Right? I was losing my thought in that part. God tests us, but he doesn't tempt us. Right? God cannot be tempted, nor does God does not tempt us with anything, nor can he himself be tempted. Right? But he does put us to the test. He tests us. That's a norm. So maybe God was testing that prophet to see whether he will obey his word or obey another word, even if it seems to be coming from God. Like the New Testament says, even if you receive a message as though from us, as though from an angel claiming so and so and so and so, right? It was actually letters to the Thessalonians about the day of the Lord. But the message, the context, the point is that whatever message you receive that's contrary to what you know is the truth, the good news, and the Old Testament, the truth, if it's contrary, do not listen to it, because you know what's been given to you. So obey it. Right? Now, you can't compare that with Islam. It was just an idea. It was just a point that I was trying to make. But with Islam, we know it's not even just a contradiction. It's much more than that. It's blasphemous because they deny Christ, our master. Right. So I just wanted you to keep that in mind. Okay, so now Josiah is king. He's born. 8 years old when he begins to rule. Then as he becomes an adult, they find the book of the law of Moses in the temple, hidden somewhere. And Josiah has someone read it to him. And as they're reading, they are all seeing how sinful the land has become, because they see all the requirements, the judicial commandments, and the laws and regulations, all these mandates that have been broken. And Josiah rips his garments apart because he knows that God's anger is blazing against the Israelites. So he sends his attendants to go and seek word from a prophetess whose name is Huldah, Huldah. And she tells them, God is very angry. But as for Josiah, because he softened his face and humbled himself before God, he will die in peace. Now let me for the account. In 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verse 26, like in the middle of 26, verse 26 says, and the king of Judah who is sending you to inquire of Jehovah. This is Huldah. This is what's her name? Come on, let me find it real quick. Sorry, give me a second. Yes, Huldah the prophetess, is telling the attendants of Josiah, says, this is what Jehovah, the God of Israel, has said. As regards the words you have heard, for the reason that your heart was soft, so that you humbled yourself because of God, at your hearing his words concerning this place and its inhabitants, and you humbled yourself before me, and ripped your garments apart and wept before me, I, even I, have heard, is the utterance of Jehovah. Here I am gathering you to your forefathers, and you will certainly be gathered to your graveyard in peace. And your eyes will not look upon all the calamity that I am bringing upon this place and its inhabitants. Now in 2 Kings, verse 22, remember we just read 2 Chronicles. In 2 Kings 22, verse 15, it says, in turn she said to them, this is the same thing again, but repeated, but with different information added. It says, this is what Jehovah, the God of Israel, has said. Say to the man that has sent you men to me, this is what Jehovah has said. Here I am bringing calamity upon this place and upon its inhabitants, even all the words of the book that the king of Judah has read, due to the fact that they have left me and have gone making sacrificial smoke to other gods in order to offend me with all the work of their hands. And my rage has been set afire against this place, and it will not be extinguished. And as to the king of Judah, who is sending you to inquire of Jehovah, this is what you should say to him. This is what Jehovah, the God of Israel, has said. As regards the word that you have heard, for the reason that your heart was soft, so that you humbled yourself because of Jehovah at hearing what I have spoken against this place and its inhabitants for it, to become an object of astonishment and a malediction, and then you ripped your garments apart and began weeping before me, I, even I, have heard, is the utterance of Jehovah. That is why here I am gathering you to your forefathers, and you will certainly be gathered to your own graveyard in peace, and your eyes will not look upon the calamity that I am bringing upon this place. Now in the very next chapter, chapter 23 of 2 Kings, after Josiah does all that, because remember he has just heard that Israel has sinned, and he's seen all the bad things that they have done. Now his eyes are open because they've read the law to him. So he wasn't privy to that prior. So now he begins to do all the things that he knows Jehovah wants him to do, which is to kill those who worship Baal, to kill their priests, to fulfill the prophecy, which he does. He burns their bones and he puts them upon the altar, right? So the prophecy is fulfilled. Josiah fulfills the prophecy. He makes a Passover, which has never, like, something that a Passover to be remembered. It was so grandiose. It has never been done before, and I believe the account says it has never been done after him. Now, that's how grandiose the Passover was. Also, the account says that no king returned to God as completely as Josiah did. No king before him and no king after him. Josiah did a lot of things for the Almighty. Okay. And apart from that, his birth was prophesied. Okay. And apart from that, God told him that he would die in peace. In verse 26 of chapter 23 of 2 Kings, even though Josiah has done all these things, right? It says, like for example, in verse 25, it says, let me start from verse 24. Also the spirit mediums and the professional foretellers of events and the teraphim and the dungy idols and all the disgusting things that had appeared in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, Josiah cleared out, in order that he might actually carry out the words of the law that were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest had found in the house of Jehovah. And like him, there did not prove to be a king prior to him who returned to Jehovah with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his vital force, according to all the law of Moses. Neither after him, it says, neither after him has there risen up one like him. In verse 26, it says, Nevertheless, Jehovah did not turn back from his great burning anger, with which his anger burned against Judah, over all the offensive things with which Manasseh had made them offend. But Jehovah said, Judah too I shall remove from my sight, just as I have removed Israel. At this point in time, Israel has been punished by Assyria. God sent the Assyrians to punish Israel. And I shall certainly reject this city that I have chosen, even Jerusalem, and the house of which I have said, my name will continue there. So we see all that Josiah has done, but we also know that God's anger is blazing. But we also know the prophecy that God has spoken concerning Josiah, that he will die in peace. Now, is it a prophecy? Or, well, yeah, it's a prophecy, you can say, that he will die in peace. However, in verse 29, it says, in his days, which is in the days of Josiah, while he was yet still alive, in his days, Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, came up to the king of Assyria. Now, Pharaoh Necho is a pharaoh. He ain't a servant of the Most High. He is not a servant of the Most High. He is a pharaoh. He is known as a god to his people, the Egyptians. But you see King Cyrus of Persia, who is a servant of the Most High, but no, let me rephrase that. He's not a servant of the Most High. He is called by the Most High as his servant. And as a matter of fact, in Isaiah, it said that even though you, Cyrus, do not know me, but yet I call you by name, and you will do that which I desire, in that he would rebuild Jerusalem. Right at that time, like Daniel had pretty much was about to die. He was alive. He was really old at that time. So Cyrus fulfilled God's desires, even though he did not know God, but God was using him to fulfill his promises. But Cyrus is a pagan king. Nebuchadnezzar was a pagan king, but God called him King of Kings, and God called him my servant. Pharaoh Necho is a pagan king, but God is using him to do something very important. Okay, he used Josiah to do something very important too. But this is the point. In Josiah's days, Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, came up to the king of Assyria by the river Euphrates, and King Josiah proceeded to go to meet him. But King Pharaoh Necho put him to death at Megiddo as soon as he saw him. So God permitted a pagan king to kill Josiah, the king whose birth was not only prophesied, the king who not only caused a Passover to be done, which has never been done before, nor had been done after him, I believe, the account says. The king who returned to God with all his heart, which no king before him or after him ever did. The king whom God said would die in peace, God permitted a pagan king to kill him. Why? Because this righteous king, although righteous, stood in the way of God's purpose, God's intention, God's will, God's purpose. What God wanted to be done, Josiah stood in the way of it. And you have to understand something. You will say, why would God let him die? Well, one, I made another video, which I have not posted yet because I have to edit, because I ramble too much in that video, and people who don't keep up, who have bad attention spans, will not watch the video. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't upload it. If you're really interested in what I like to say, you would probably will listen to it, but most of you will not. So I decided not to upload it. But in that video, I talk about the power of God. There is no damage that can be done that God cannot undo. And this is the importance of prayer, which I'm not going to get into. But you have to see it from the perspective of the Almighty, not from a human frame, not from a human mindset, not from human eyes. Okay, God is going to bless Josiah in the kingdom. He most certainly will bless Josiah. Josiah has an inheritance preserved for him in the resurrection. And remember, the blessings of the resurrection in the new world will be so ridiculously, inconceivably good that all the bad things that has happened in this lifetime will not be called to mind. But of course, right now, we are so limited, we can't fathom that. All some people will do is become angry with God. Why this? Why that? You see, but it's only in that time that people will really feel bad about how they treated and how they expressed their spirit against God. It's only then, right? So keep that also in mind, right? So God permitted Josiah to die. Let's read 2 Chronicles. There's additional information added there. In 2 Chronicles chapter 35, let me double check, chapter 35, start from verse 20. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the house, right, Josiah did all these things like the Passover and all the righteous deeds. It says, Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, came up to fight at Carchemish by the Euphrates. Then Josiah went out to encounter him. At that, he, which is Pharaoh Necho, sent messengers to Josiah, saying, What do I have to do with you, O king of Judah? It is not against you that I am coming today, but it is against another house that my fight is, and that God himself has said that I should cause a disturbance, in other words, wage war against them. Refrain for your own sake because of God who is with me, and do not let him bring you to ruin. So here it is, a pagan king. Pharaoh, maybe I shouldn't be calling him a pagan king, but there's no indication that he wasn't a pagan. I mean, he's a pharaoh, you know what I mean? So pretty sure he wasn't a servant of the Most High, but he's being used by the Most High. No kingdom rises to power and no kingdom falls out of power except God's authority. So everyone is basically a servant of God because they're going to serve his purpose. You know, you could even argue that God can use even the devil to serve his purpose. You know, God can use anybody to serve his purpose because God is almighty. You can't fathom the mind of God, right? But that's besides the point. And don't quote me on that. I don't want to blaspheme. But anyway, so listen to what Pharaoh Necho says. What do I have to do with you, O king of Judah? It is not against you that I am coming today, but it is against another house that my fight is, and that God himself has said that I should cause a disturbance. Refrain for your own sake because of God who is with me, and do not let him bring you to ruin. So you could kind of pretty much say that maybe he was a servant of the Most High God, because why is it that he's getting a message from God? You know what I mean? So, but the point is, here is a Pharaoh who is going to wage war against a different kingdom. And Josiah, now he's going to wage war against a different kingdom, not against Josiah, against a different kingdom, against a different house. And it is God who is sending him. But Josiah intervenes. So he is intervening not with a man's purpose, not with a man's will, but with God's will. It says, and Josiah did not turn his face away from Pharaoh Necho, but to fight against him in disguise. So he disguised himself and did not listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God. So maybe Pharaoh Necho was a servant of God. Maybe he wasn't a pagan. I don't know. Let me not, be presumptuous. Got to be careful with what I say. So Josiah came to fight in the valley of the plains of Megiddo. By the way, Megiddo, Armageddon, it's like kind of like the same reference there. It says, and the shooters got to shoot King Josiah, so that the king said to his servants, take me down, for I have been severely wounded. And then I'm going to skip a couple verses, and it says, and he died and was buried in the graveyard of his forefathers. And all of Judah and Jerusalem went mourning over Josiah. And Jeremiah began to chant over Josiah. And all the male singers and female singers keep talking about Josiah in their dirges down till today. And they have them set as a regulation over Israel. And there they are written among the dirges. It says, as for the rest of the affairs of Josiah and his acts of loving kindness, according to what is written in the law of Jehovah, and his affairs, the first and the last, there they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. So the important lesson is, do not interfere with God's purposes. Do not interfere with God's will. Do not interfere. We know what his will is. So, an example that I can think of is God's will is for all sorts of people to be saved, to come to repentance and seek Jehovah's face, and dwell in his security, right? And possibly be saved from death at Armageddon. So perhaps, let's say, there's a certain group of people that you don't like. And so you don't want them to get the message of God because you don't like them. You have a personal grudge against them. Well, that's not God's will. Your will is for them to not be saved. Maybe you hate them. Maybe they treated you some way. Don't interfere. If God's will is for all people to be saved, whatever your conflict is with them, throw that away. Throw it away. Do not interfere with God's will, with God's business. I can't think of another example to give, but pretty much that's the lesson. That even if you are a righteous person and you've done a lot for the Almighty, that will not be considered in the moment. In the new world, it will be considered, but perhaps, I'm assuming. But certainly in the moment, God's will trumps yours. And there's no amount of good you could have done in the past which would, cause God's will to be blunted because you wanted to intervene. No. So let Josiah be a classic example. Let's see if there's more I can add. I don't think so, but that's pretty much the lesson. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. If there's anything else that I want to add, it'll just be in the video description. All right, I spoke long enough. If you watched till this part, well done. I appreciate you. And that's it. Peace.